Hi everyone, my name is Mihika Jain. Welcome back to another episode of Decoding with WINFO. Today we have a design panel featuring three incredible speakers from the University of Washington, HCI, and informatics design community. We have a lot of exciting conversation for you planned, and today we will be exploring how we approach designing technologies in ways that are ethical, inclusive, and forward-thinking. We hope you enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today we have an exciting design panel featuring three incredible voices from the University of Washington design and HCI community. Today we're thrilled to be joined with Professor Jason Yip, an associate professor in the Information School whose research focuses on how children and families engage with technologies and learn together. Professor Spencer Williams, an assistant teaching professor at the iSchool who focuses on critical design, digital media, and the intersection of science communication and social media. And then Peter Corroon Jr., a UX designer at Oracle and a recent UW informatics alum. His journey from academia to industry offers a unique perspective on user-centered design and the evolution of UX. Let's start learning more about each and every one of you and your role through or post UW. Could you all, we're going to start off with some opening questions. So could you each briefly introduce yourselves and share what drew you exactly to the University of Washington?
I'm Jason Yip. I've been here for 10 years. I study families and children and technologies. And one of the reasons why I study that is because I often think that families are kind of like one of the longest relationships you'll have for like your entire life. Like, you know, if in theory, like you're born, like you might have a mom or father or some other guardian or parent that will be a person that you'll know for a long time. And so that relationship for a long time can mediate how people learn with technology and go with it. I'm the director of a group called Kids Team that does intergenerational co-design with children ages 6 to 11. And so for like twice a week after school on campus, we have children come in and they design new technologies for families and other children in this way. So some of our designs have gone out to Amazon, Duolingo, Microsoft, recently PBS Kids, WGBH, that we'll start to send out very soon. And we've done a lot of cool things, so happy to be here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Spencer. I've been in my role now for 2 years, although I did my PhD at University of Washington as well in HCI, so I've been in Seattle for, I guess, like 7, 8 years. Like was kind of mentioned, a lot of my teaching focuses on HCI and design. My research work has always been around science communication sort of topics and meta science topics more broadly. I'm really interested in, you know, how to make the most of the really good research that gets done. Some of that is through, you know, communicating that, right, to the people who can use it, various different stakeholders, right, translating that to design, right, translating that to engineering practice, translating that to, you know, health and medicine, right, and nutrition. So understanding how researchers currently do this sort of public communication and translation and how to support that is sort of what drives me and the research we do in our group.
And I'm Peter Corroon. I'm a recent graduate of the informatics program as of this past December. I also was a Info 200 TA for a couple quarters, so seeing some of you here is awesome. Now I currently work full-time as a UX designer at Oracle, where I'm working within sort of the intersection of fintech and also AI, which is really exciting and challenging space. Probably the least qualified to be up here next to these outstanding professors, but hoping to offer a different perspective as someone more to the path of industry.
Awesome. We're all super excited to have you guys here. We're going to start off with a kind of philosophical question. How would you describe your design philosophy in one sentence or a couple words?
My design philosophy is democratic collaboration and how we consider the possibility of equality and equity in design. So that's where I kind of take a look at these things.
Yeah, I guess to some extent my design philosophy, the one-word version, I guess empathy. I think this is something that is really important in the space that I work in, right? Trying to understand who the different stakeholders are in the communication space, what their relationship is with science as an institution. That can be very sticky and contentious, right, and across a lot of topics. And so empathy and collaboration is really critical, I think, in that space.
For me, I think it's designing for the sake of people and not for the sake of technology. That's something I try to remind myself every day when I'm doing my design work. I think, especially in this sort of time with the AI revolution, we get so caught up in designing tools just for the sake of tools and the technology that we've created, but a lot of times we forget the people who are sort of at the end of that technology, the end of those tools. So trying to remind myself of the human aspect and the human in the loop is very important. That's something I try to focus on.
Awesome. What is one design failure in tech or beyond that has influenced you, how you teach, whether that's through how you practice design or how you
So many. I sort of see, my sense is, and this is where there's a lot of conflict in design, because we want to get everything out so fast and so quick, but we're unwilling to think about these bigger consequences. And I don't know if it's a failure on one particular design, but I'll say we see it a lot in tech, that there's not a lot of restraint to really, is this really the thing we want, right? We see a lot of let's just fly this car off the bridge, let's just do it and see what happens. I was like, there are people's lives, right? These things matter, they can do so much. And so, I mean, a lot of it right now it's kind of scary, right? We talk about AI, but we can talk also lots about social media, smartphones, things like that. We just kind of go very quick. And we like that as it makes money, it makes profit, and it's cool. It's the next thing I see on stage, and I really want it, but I'm like, do we really? Because we're always talking about this stuff now. Now there's a lot of sort of backlash, restraint. We see smartphone bans in Australia. We see a lot of people saying no to social. We're saying a lot of pushback now. So it's I don't know if it's one, but I feel like it's a philosophy that you see right there, and that this sort of let's just do it, right? And it might be even good for people. The hard part is I think it's sometimes under the guise of human-centered design, right? It's what people want, right? Oh, I did a focus group, and I did these interviews, and they say they want this stuff, but it's yes, but can we take a moment, because so much of it is just, I can't say one. I feel like, because indicting one is really bad. I'd say it's a whole philosophy of this. What do you think?
Yeah, one that I often talk about when I teach 360 is some of the dangers in, I guess, throwing around the notion of data-driven design too carelessly. I talk about an example of an algorithm that was developed to allocate hospital resources, for example, based on things like age and risk and healthcare cost. That wound up disproportionately allocating more healthcare sort of resources to white patients versus black patients, despite the fact that race wasn't a predictor variable, right, in this algorithm. It's one of these things that you can build it and naively think okay, this is totally fine, right? All of the parameters are sort of neutral, right, in some sense, but they're heavily correlated with aspects of our lives and where that data is coming from that isn't necessarily neutral, right, and has all of these kind of power imbalances sort of baked in it. It's totally data-driven, right, in a way that naively makes total sense, but still ends up perpetuating a lot of harms, right? So I think being critical about if you're using this in your design, where that data is coming from, how it's being generated. risk of recording in the classroom, I guess, and how that's being generated, right? And thinking a little bit more critically, right, about what we mean. We talk about being, data-driven.
Yeah, I think for me, I can give maybe a little bit more of an industry example that I think is applicable to all you younger designers. But getting tasked with my first design project, I'm really excited. I'm spending lots of time trying to make sure everything's pixel perfect and it looks great. And then the next morning, I get into a critique with my manager and my team, and quickly realize what a real industry critique looks like. Fix this here. We need to iterate on this. Are there some other ways to explore this? So I think two things I learned from that is, one, you can't fall in love with your work too much. Within this space, there's so much iteration that happens, and so much reworking of the product and reworking of ideas. You can't become too attached with just one idea or your own work. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, as I've gotten more experience, I've realized that visual design often takes a backseat, right? The most important thing is really solving the problem and prioritizing the usability. So I think sometimes as younger designers, we fall in love with how something looks. We like pretty shiny buttons, but in reality, especially once you get to the corporate world, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is being able to solve a user problem and push something out that creates a better product in the world and in the industry. So.
Okay. Before we dive deeper, if you weren't in academia or design, what do you think you would be doing instead?
I might still be a high school teacher. I taught chemistry for 6 years. I would still, I really do enjoy the craft. I think design and teaching kind of have this really nice balance and relationship. So I would be still a high school teacher, or maybe I would be a rover sitter, because I really like dogs. So those two are the options. But if I were more serious, I think I'd still be an educator. I really enjoy working with design students. I really enjoy working with a lot of the students I do. Given that sometimes I might gripe about it, but who doesn't gripe about jobs that they love? But I think in all seriousness, like there is a loveliness to that sort of relationship that I really enjoy, and I love watching my students just grow up. Like I see them on social media. Maybe that's one of the good things on social media. Right? I can see them growing up. I see them having families, and even LinkedIn is kind of fun to just sort of see people getting their first jobs, and sometimes even seeing some of those layoffs. And it's like, oh, I hope you're okay. So as a teacher, it sort of is heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah.
But I think that I would still, maybe not in design, but I would end up somewhere in like still education in that sense.
Yeah, I guess for me, I've always been really into music. I still write music on the side. I think that's something I would do. I mean, if I won the lottery, right? This was the more financially stable sort of option for me. But something on that side, I think.
Yeah, for me, I was in San Francisco a couple weeks ago at a park, and I saw one of those people carrying like 30 dogs on a leash. Yes. So I think, maybe I'd take that up. That seems like a fun job. But beyond that, I'm really into photography, and I think it helps it helps me slow down and appreciate life more and capture the essence of different moments or emotions. So that's something I like to do as a hobby and would love to do full time. But yeah, maybe if I won the lottery as well.
Okay, awesome. We're going to get into some of our deeper questions now. The first one is about designing for diverse communities. How do you, as a designer, approach designing technologies that cater to diverse communities, especially considering cultural, socioeconomic, and generational differences? And we can go in any order, whoever does it.
I think two things come to mind here. And the first is, you sort of have to train yourself to have more of a critical lens and a critical eye. And that's one of the great things about the informatics program, is that they offer so many courses and opportunities to be more critical and of different issues and different groups. I think especially today, data is really the oxygen that fuels all of the technology and a lot of the artificial intelligence. But when we look at where is that data coming from, you know, it's coming from all these sources in the past, and what do we know about the past, and what do we know about history, right? It can be racist, it can be sexist, it can be all those sorts of things. So being able to understand, you know, the root of where this information is coming from and be critical of that. And then the second thing is bringing those groups into their work. I think a lot of times we get lost in our own ideas and our own work, but when we're designing something for another community or another group, it makes no sense to not bring those people in with us and to be collaborating alongside them and bringing them into the work. So I think those are two things that stand out for me.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I can use examples from my own teaching, right? Often when I teach a class, I try to get to know as much as I can about the incoming class, right? I'll often start by asking, you know, what are people's career plans, right? Why are they, I mean, I take a lot of required classes, like why do you take 360? Sort of like, yeah, I have to, right? But even to that extent, right? Like understanding what people are going to be using this for, what their specific needs are, what they're coming in with, right? All of that is valuable, and it shifts around quite a bit, right? Depending on who it is that you're working for. You know, I like to talk about my process of designing the class with the class as well as sort of an example. So I think being flexible and agile is often helpful, right, when we're working with really diverse sort of stakeholders. It's important, I think, to collect as much information, right, as you can. Get to know your stakeholders, get to know who it is that you're working for, right, to some extent. And then beyond that, right, being sort of flexible and reflexive enough, right, to kind of adapt and measure against those needs and navigate what can oftentimes be very, you know, conflicting ideas, right, about what's best, right. Being, I think, clear about your values and clear about the values of the people that you're working with can be a useful tool in navigating what are likely to be sort of conflicting constraints and interests.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of designing for diversity and inclusion and equity, it starts with sort of acknowledgement that there are kind of spectrums of design. One of which is like design is dictatorship, right? The sort of like, this company is the expert in design. They have built this thing. They have it all down. They have the top professionals. They go to like the top schools. They come out there. But then there's this other side of the pendulum, as like I said before, like design is democracy, right? Like that there are democratic practices, and that democracy isn't just this sort of abstract, like I vote once a year or once every 4 years for an election, right? That democracy can be a part of how we think about design and philosophy. You know, and so I find that companies and researchers and others swing between dictatorship and democracy. They kind of sometimes, and there are reasons why you might pick one or the other. I tend to be more the democracy. I like it just because like there is this idea that being able to I just like the relationships you can build in design. Like you know, I work with these children that come to my lab like 50 times a year, and they come multiple years. Some of them like 5 or 6 years. I've known them for like I've done like I've known them since like they were kids already, and that's a group that, you know, oftentimes it doesn't have a lot of design experience, but it's the acknowledgement that if children can design, then anyone can do it, right? And a lot of times designers have to make way for that, right? We have to bring the good snacks so that people can eat. We have to bring the arts and crafts. Like it doesn't have to, we don't have to do AutoCAD. We don't have to do Figma. We can actually sit down with a kid and work with these. And I think a lot of those things can translate really well. And our lab has done a lot of work with children with autism. Like, you know, how do we bring okay, so if we have autistic kids coming to our lab to design with us, how do we bring their caretakers along, right? Caretakers as part of it. If I think about librarians, we've done a lot of work with misinformation librarians. How do we go down south? Like instead of having them, if they have to come to our lab, that's a lot of constraint. We have to make the effort to go down south to South Seattle and Columbia City to do that work. If I'm working with, say, like low-income Latino families in Los Angeles focused on SunSmart technologies, you know, how do I provide Spanish translators and childcare alongside with making them feel comfortable that, you know, a lot of the design work is, and also showing the design over time, which means it's long, right? Like I might show something over the process of months down the line. Like I'll even call them up and say like, hey, we built this thing. Remember you talked about this, and seeing that like, remember you did this, and recognizing that diversity doesn't often mean have to be large numbers like big data. It can also be smaller in scope, and trying to know that there are stories that actually do reflect. So that's kind of how we do it here within our lab.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. Okay, the next question is going to be about your work, Professor Gibb, especially surrounding co-design and the work with the kids team at UW,
Yeah.
and involving children within the design process. What insights have you gained from this intergenerational collaboration, and how has it influenced your perspective on design?
Yeah, I think what I've learned is that it takes a while before people feel comfortable with design. Like even for you all as undergrads and others, the workplace critique and things, that because it's very relational. So for example, if I bring a kid to like, let's say, like a big tech company with lots of different things and they're oohed and awed by everything right there, right? That they might end up having different opinions and have they worked with me for like the next like 1 year, 2 years down. Like I can sort of tell. And so there's this, we've seen a lot of kids who are very quiet, end up opening up like, you know, and really talking a lot more and becoming. And so some of the things that I learned a lot from kids is that the one is that they have incredible insights, but you have to really spend a long time with them. And I don't think people like hearing that. I think a lot of people want to just do one and done focus groups. It's very quick. I'm just going to hire this focus group. I'm going to bring them in. I'm going to show them my design. I got the data. Okay, great. We're done. Rather than think, it tends to be a very like colonial model of like, here, let me show you this. Oh, we're good. I took it away. We're good. Rather than this notion of like, can we build more of a relational model with our communities, right? Can we actually think about ways that I see these kids grow up and actually become designers themselves, but also doing really great things around it. You know, some of the kids, like they say really insightful things that, you know, in some of the papers that we cover. And that's kind of why we've been very successful here at the UW with children, because we just, if you can get kids to like lower that barrier, or it doesn't have to be kids, it can be like just anybody, like over time, like they start to gain insights that you're just like, oh, I didn't even see this coming. So I mean, that's kind of one of our big secrets. We just really like having good snacks and just working with the kids over the time period. And also, it doesn't have to be kids, it can be adults as well. I think the other part of it that is really important is that because a lot of our undergrads are adults, like they have to feel comfortable too, right? And so it isn't just this model where we only listen to children. Like there's a back and forth a lot. Like a lot of our ideas do come from some of the undergrads that worked in our labs. Like they come up with the ideas, and it's only because like they've been situated with children, and they kind of forgot that they were adults again, and kind of remembered like, oh, like I was a kid. Like yeah, like you can be a kid too, right? And coming back and then realizing that some of their opinions also matter too as well. So we have this kind of notion where it's a really nice learning community that we developed over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. The next question is about science communication and design. So Professor Williams, your research focuses on online science communication. How can design principles enhance the public's understanding and engagement with scientific information online?
Yeah, so one of the primary differences, right, between coming across scientific information, you know, that you're kind of seeking out, right, versus something on social media that you kind of just happen across serendipitously, is you've got all this stuff surrounding it, right? You have people commenting on it, right? You have a person who's shared it, right, that may or may not be kind of known to you, and they may be framing it or reframing it in a particular way. So one way of thinking about, I think, platform design, right, is less so, you know, what you're affording to, for example, like news outlets or people even creating the initial post, but what kind of social dynamics you're affording that are surrounding and kind of framing the conversation, right, or around that scientific piece, for example. And there's a lot of, I guess there's a high level answer and like a kind of technocratic kind of answer. I think on technical details, right, there's a lot of things that have come out from my research and others around how, you know, if there are people leaving comments under a scientific piece, right? If they're uncivil, or if they're very jargony, or if they're very negative, right? People will kind of bring that you know, expectation right into the article itself that affects their sort of passing heuristic as far as like what to expect from that piece. And that can elevate, right, or that can kind of silence certain types of scientific, you know, kind of products. So there's a lot of specific things you can do about that. Even hiding user comments, right, is something that a lot of platforms do that can make a big difference, right, as far as who's reading this thing and how it's received. But I think the higher level thing is, you know, in design we talk a lot about wicked problems, right? And one of the elements of a wicked problem is kind of the need to frame and what the problem is in the first place, right? To diagnose the cause of this. There can be many different ways of framing these issues, right? And many different ways of thinking about the cause. And so I think one practice that designers need to be good at, right, is working across these different frames and being kind of reflective, right? And I think I had a broader point that I'm sort of struggling to articulate. But the kind of take home is that framing is really everything, I think, in science and scientific misinformation. How conversations are framed and reframed by different individuals can shift what people attune to, right? It can shift what questions people think are worth asking. So I think a designerly perspective around this framing, right? What questions we are asking, what we consider to be important, and how are we outlining these scientific problems can be a valuable perspective. I don't know if that's exactly what you're going for, but.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, and then transitioning from academia to industry, reflecting on your journey from the UW iSchool to your current role at Oracle, what are some pivotal moments or experiences that prepared you for the challenges of the tech industry?
Yeah, so I think one big thing that I'm starting to appreciate more and more from my education as I'm continuing to work in industry is the ability to have gone to work on things with all sorts of different people, right? I think, especially in the iSchool, you have such a unique opportunity to work with people of all different interests and fields and backgrounds, right? Like you're working on a project with people who might be interested in engineering or data science or design or research, right? And these people all have different perspectives and they have different ideas, and being able to bounce those off each other, and also being able to bring your designs to those different people and translate them and speak their languages is really important. And especially once you get into industry, you have to start to work with a lot of different roles. Like I have to talk with PMs every day, I have to talk with developers, and they don't speak the design language that I speak, right? So being able to translate those ideas and some of the things I work on to those people is extremely important. And I think it's something that I encourage you all to you know, lean in on a little bit more within the opportunity you have here in the iSchool.
Awesome, thank you all for sharing. The next question is about ethics in design. In an era where technology pervades every aspect of life, how do you incorporate ethical considerations into your design process, and what frameworks guide your decision making?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard because user-centered design, we always tell students, like, listen to your users, right? Listen to them and be empathetic, do all the critiques. But sometimes it's really difficult because design can also be really done poorly for users, even if they want it. And you know, like, we've seen this with deceptive patterns already in design, right? Like, how do I get you to push that button more? How do I get you to, you know, scroll infinitely at 2 in the morning, right? How do I keep getting you? And the hard part is that we have to say this really, maybe the quiet part loud, but I guess we'll say it, is that all of those things they're really profitable, right? Like, it's really good. Like, yeah, if you're up at 2 in the morning scrolling at night, somebody's making money off of that, right? If you're pushing that button just a little bit more too often, somebody's making money off of that right there, right? And the hard part of this is, I don't know if it's controversial or whatever, but I'll say it, is that you know, it's all under the guise of user-centered design. We say it all the time, listen to the users. But like, if I kept listening to the users, of course, I'm going to keep building better buttons, better scroll, better things to get there. Like the attention economy is so. I don't know how to think about it as ethics, because I think that ethics has to come from a very bigger place beyond just the individual. It has to come from policy, big policies that really say that like we care about the person, not just like the number of clicks or the number of things we buy, the number of things that they sell, however, but that you know, and that I don't know whether it's government or I don't know whether it's industry, but it's got to be something, because I don't think it's an individual designer, and that's kind of why I think I get a lot of comments from when I teach classes about ethics. They're like, oh, well, what if my boss wants me to do this? What my boss? And I'm like, yeah, what if your boss wants you to do that? I don't know, because your boss shouldn't be asking you to do that, and yet they are, right? Because their boss is asking for it, and their boss, like, it goes so high. So, yeah, I feel this stomach churn part, because so much of it has to be. And then we have to admit this, right, as designers, that like, yeah, like they asked me to build a button, I built a better button. In fact, I've built buttons that have gotten more clicks than ever, and I know what it takes. And so, yeah, I don't even know how you feel about teaching it or how you feel about practicing it, but I'm just like, yeah. But my sense is that, like, I think putting ethics in, not that people shouldn't be ethical, by the way, you should all be ethical, like, you should all have individual moralities that are important, but to put it on the onus of a designer and say, like, listen, like, I got a job, I got to build this slot machine, I got to build a better slot machine for you, one that's going to get me, like, as many more, I mean, how do you deal with that, right? That's a really hard question without some sort of regulatory, I mean, the EU is doing some really big things in some other countries, but I feel like putting the onus on an individual designer, it's without actually talking about the big elephant in the room, which is actually government intervention / like industry standards and practices that go through it.
Yeah, I guess I'll definitely echo what Jason said about it being such a systematic problem, right? It's very difficult to make ethical decisions, right? When the system that you're working in, all the incentives are aligned, right, or misaligned, I guess I should say, in a much less ethical way. One thing I do try to sort of talk about, and it's easier said than done, I think in a lot of sense, is to try to constantly reflect on what power you have and what power you don't have, right? If you're thinking about trying to make ethical decisions as an individual, it's often easy to think of yourself as powerless, and to some extent, when you're first starting off as a job, you are fairly powerless, right? You've got a lot of bosses, right? They're going to tell you to do something. But the power you gain as you move up in your career, right? It's easy for that power to kind of stay invisible, right? You're used to you're almost in a rut to some extent, an ethical rut, right? But you get promoted, you make money, you start making decisions, right? I think reflecting on that, right? Sort of attuning yourself to that. What are the power, kind of levers that I have to press in my day-to-day? How is that changing, right, as I'm kind of moving up the ladder, and staying true to like the ethical principles that you believe in and making those decisions, right? I think there's something to that. I think there are other people who would say, whatever, just like make your money at Amazon and then go donate a bunch, right? So like, that's another approach, right, to being an ethical, global citizen, right? It's or work for a nonprofit, right? I think there are many ways to be an ethical person, right? And I think it just takes a lot of self-honesty, right? And it takes, being clear and articulating what your values are. So I don't think there's one size fits all approach to this, and it doesn't always need to manifest, right, in a specific design decision. But again, it's very sticky, and like Jason said, I think applying ethics as an individual is often challenging when you live in a society of individuals who are applying ethics in different ways, right?
Or what sounds, like it's how bad could building a better button be, right?
Right.
It's like, but willingly admit that the button itself is quite pushy in that sense, right? But you live as you get older, you live with tension. I think that's my old man. I am the oldest person in this room. So I can say with the old man. The old man can say, like, you live with constant contradiction and tension. That's as you get older. That's just what happens. So. and you had to walk away. It doesn't get easier, right? As I get even older and I sort of see these things, I'm just like, dang, like, why don't we have a policy for that? Oh, because it would be like, you know, and how do I make it easier for designers to be ethical? But it's so hard, like, because there's money to be made, and design, it's the engine that fuels everything, and I don't know, I feel very in conflict all the time about it.
Yeah, I think, you know, they said some great things. Just also want to encourage you all, you know, while you're in this stage of life in your career, to start figuring out what your own ethics and morals are. I think it's a lot easier to do when you're a student and you're exploring all sorts of different subjects and experiences, because once you start getting into industry, like they said, you know, you can get pushed and swayed around by people who might be above you or have a bigger title next to your name. So it's important to start to determine, you know, your personal values and opinions, because it does, you know, it starts from the ground up, right? So it is tricky, but being able to understand at least what you personally value is important, because it gives you, you know, the power of autonomy, and eventually you can make decisions once you do get, you know, more experience and you know, higher titles. I think another thing I'll recommend is I took a class with Professor Hineker. I think it's Moral Reasoning and Interaction Design. I highly recommend that one. Yeah, you go through lots of different ethical frameworks, and you critique products and designs through those frameworks. So it sort of helps you shape your own you know, ethical thinking, and also look at different frameworks that are out there. And I think it's, you know, it's a good exercise to draw from, you know, those different cards and think about different ethical approaches, and have your own ideas on what's ethical and what's moral.
Yeah, I mean, in consideration as a design, as you get more into the field, I think part of it also is that, like, design doesn't necessarily have to be the thing that you do for your job. It can also be considerations of how you communicate with people, right? And I think folks like Alexis Hineker and others talk about, you know, what if I gave you the infinite money right here, could you build a better Instagram for teens? What would it look like, right? What would you strip out of the old one? What would it look like? What would be a good version of that? What would be one that, like, you know, that teens themselves could want, and also know the challenges of all the issues that we've had with kinds of designs like that, right? And I think there is this really important aspect. I mean, while people might feel powerless within their jobs, also knowing, like, you know, if I could design the better world, right, what would it look like? And knowing that internally or externally, however you can, I think is very important, because you need to compare and sort of see, like, am I building more cookies and data trackers? Like, how do I feel about that? Versus, what would a world look like without that, right? What would a world look like if I want to build a better smartphone that could, you know, be, you know, one that embodies values and ethics that I would feel personally good about, despite, even if the world is surrounded by very addictive smartphones, right? Or even if the world is surrounded by these, you know, sugar-coated technologies, right? I think knowing what you value, even if the world is like that, it sends signal, and for you to know that is actually really important, despite, like, working for companies, or not that companies are all bad, by the way, but like designing designs that may feel very much like, oh my gosh, we're just keeping on pushing to build more money, in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Lots of good things to consider, so thank you all. We're going to move on to our last question, which is advice for aspiring UX designers. For students aspiring to enter the field of design, what advice would you offer regarding building a diverse portfolio, developing their design skills, gaining practical experience, and navigating the job market? I'm sure all of you could give us.
You got a job, so maybe we'll start with you, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot packed into that question, but I think the best piece of advice I can give is to just go out and like do and create and be curious, and, you know, try to gain as much experience as possible by you know, chasing your curiosity and working on different projects and different designs, and the next thing you'll know, you have tons of experience, you'll have lots of projects on your resume, but don't feel like you have to live up to some expectation that's set by the industry or your peers. Just, I think the best part of this field is being able to do hands-on work and creating things. And the second thing I'll say is that the great part of this, you know, this industry and this domain is that it moves so fast and there's always so much change that it's not completely ruled by precedent, right? So as much technology and frameworks and things that have been created in the past that we try to follow, there's also so much new stuff that's happening. Like we think of how disruptive AI is. No one knows the right answer. So your ideas are just as good as anyone else who you might think has more experience or a fancier job title. So don't feel like you have to be constrained based on what other people are thinking. I think that's something important to recognize.
Yeah, I'm almost hesitant to give advice on that, as an academic, like I haven't had to deal with the UX job market. Oh, I mean, I interned as a PhD student, I suppose, but that was a few years ago, in a much better job market. I think one piece of advice I can give, as far as like gaining experience, right, and building a portfolio, right, while you're at the university, I can say I've had lots of students apply to work at my research group, right, and I think a lot of them want to do design work, right, for the most part. And sometimes it works out, but in a lot of cases, some of the research is not really research or design, right? We're not building like artifacts. And so often there isn't much for them. But in a lot of cases, right, I guess I try to support students in building and following problems that they really care about, right? And so there's an element of kind of like being proactive and thinking through like, hey, I have this idea, right? Like, I want to build this specific thing, right? Can we try this together? I don't know if that works with everybody. It's something that the students I have seen out of my group who tend to be fairly successful as far as getting jobs and going off to graduate school and things like that, there is a sort of like level of proactivity in identifying problems, in building, whether it's just a kind of portfolio piece or trying to think through like, hey, let's tackle this specific thing. That seems to work for them. I don't know if this is very universalizable advice. And again, I would take anything I say with a grain of salt, right? Like, I don't really know what I'm talking about to some extent. But I think being proactive, and then I think the only other thing that I do actually think is good advice is making sure to tell the story of every design project you have in your portfolio, thinking through what the narrative arc of that project is. There's this quote I use when I teach 360, the truth can't stand on its own legs. It's a quote by Carlin Campbell, right? There's a tendency oftentimes when you're presenting your work to talk through like, hey, I did all this really cool stuff, right? Presuming that people will find it interesting. I think when you're developing a portfolio, right, when you're selling yourself, assume people won't find it interesting unless you explain why, right? Unless you build narrative stakes, right, and kind of set up the problem effectively and tell the story effectively. So those would be my two sort of like, maybe well-informed, maybe anecdotal takes.
Yeah, I'm like old, so I want to tell you advice that you're not going to want to hear. But I'll say, I think designers need to read more, and this is like, and I'm not saying this as like a teacher. I mean, I legitimately like read more books, which it's shocking that like people don't read more. Again, old man talking. I get it, but I'm saying I'll give you the example that really matters, and then I'll say it from another. The example I'm saying is that like when I teach 360 or I work with designers, some of them come up with like lame ideas that I'm like, oh my god, if you just read a newspaper. If you had just read more, you would have known that like we've done this thing for like decades, right? Like, why do I need 1,000 recipe apps? Please don't put a recipe app on your portfolio. I can guarantee it's not, unless like you've read all about it, it's not good, right? But so it's reading is not this sort of boring. It's meant so that like you can sort of understand what the world is. Because as designers, again, you're kind of creating this future, right? And for too many people, like they're creating futures in which they don't know the past, they don't know anything, they're just building it. And it's like, I'm like watching like the sort of like train fall off the tracks right here. It's just like, oh my god, you don't even know what's happening right here. Like, whether you read fiction, nonfiction, Black Mirror-esque type things, philosophy, good design, fiction, whatever. I think it's actually really, and the reason why I say this also as a designer is because, and I tell this a lot to my grad students, but I think it's good for design, is that a lot of folks who come in 360 and want to do that, they're always asking me, I want to learn Figma, I want to learn, like, at the time it was InDesign, and then another time I was like, they want to learn these skills, and I'm just like, no, machines are gonna be better than you at that, right? You've already seen AI get integrated into Figma. You kind of have to beat AI. How do you beat AI? You beat it by knowing how to make human arguments about design that link everything. So I sort of say that, like, if you're really smart, like, you begin to, like, think about your life like a carrot, like this really, really deep root that goes in. But what a carrot does really well is that it also grows laterally, right? It grows, it knows the connections to make. So if you have really deep design knowledge, but then you've read enough work and you know how to build your book, then you understand, like, I don't have to build 1,000 recipe apps. I can build this thing that's a lot more innovative right there, right? Oh, you know what? That's really unethical. I've read enough works to know that that's a bad mistake. I'm not going to build that for my portfolio, right? And you know, I know it's hard. Like, I get it. Like, my trick for reading, honestly, is I sit on my couch and I just leave one book there, and when I come back home dead tired, I'm like, oh, I'll just read for 5 minutes, right? That's it. That's all I do. But I think it helps. It really, it's such a old piece of advice, but, like, trust me, it's like you gotta beat AI, right? And AI might have the storage of all those books, but it doesn't know how to make those big connections. You can try it. I've done enough ChatGPT talks to know that it doesn't know everything. And the way the designers are going to beat AI these days is having very in-depth knowledge, knowing how to spread out, get there, and then figure out. And the rest of the stuff you'll figure out, like Figma, portfolio. That stuff's easy, right? The hard stuff is knowing, because my gosh, if I see another recipe app on a portfolio, I'm gonna, like, I don't need another salad thing. Like, I already know how to do this, right?
Yeah.
So, sorry, that's a rant.
Awesome. Thank you all for your insights and advice. We gained a lot from your different perspectives. We're going to open up to the floor for any questions.